Part 1. Introduction and the Roots of Resistance. He was called a troublemaker, a terrorist, a revolutionary. But Nelson Mandela was more than any label. He was a man who turned pain into purpose, captivity into strength, and hatred into forgiveness. His life was a battle, not just against apartheid, but against despair, division, and the limits of the human spirit. Mandela's philosophy of forgiveness, leadership, and endurance is a beacon for anyone facing their own struggles. This is the story of a man who changed a nation and inspired the world. Welcome to Nelson Mandela, the philosophy of forgiveness, leadership, and endurance. 1. The Roots of Resistance. Nelson Mandela was born Rolihlahla Mandela on July 18, 1918, in the village of Mvezo, in South Africa's Transkei region. His name, meaning troublemaker, in Xhosa, was a prophecy. He was born into a world divided by color, where apartheid's iron grip stripped black South Africans of dignity, land, and freedom. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakeni-Iswa, was a Thembu chief, a man of pride who counseled his community. But colonial authorities stripped him of his title and land, a wound that young Rolihlahla felt deeply. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. When Mandela was 9, his father died, leaving the family in poverty. They moved to Kunu, a rural village of mud huts and rolling hills. Here, Mandela herded cattle, played with sticks, and listened to elders tell stories of African resistance. These tales, of warriors of pride, of a time before oppression, lit a spark in him. He saw a world worth fighting for, a world where his people could stand tall. But apartheid was everywhere. It was in the whites-only signs, the passed laws that control where blacks could go, the schools that offered crumbs instead of knowledge. Mandela's mother, a devout Christian, sent him to a mission school, where a teacher gave him the name Nelson. It was a colonial mark, meant to erase his heritage. But Mandela carried his Xhosa roots like armor, even as he excelled in academics and boxing. At 16, he underwent the Xhosa rite of manhood, a ceremony that marked him as a man with responsibilities. He enrolled at Clarkberry, then Fort Hare, South Africa's leading black university. There, he met young minds like Oliver Tambo, who shared his anger at injustice. They debated, dreamed, and questioned a system that deemed them less than human. In 1940, at 22, Mandela was expelled from Fort Hare for joining a student protest. It was his first act of defiance, a sign of the fire within. He fled to Johannesburg, a bustling city of gold mines and ghettos. There, apartheid's cruelty was stark. Black workers toiled in dangerous mines, lived in shanty towns, and faced daily humiliation. Mandela worked as a clerk, then a law article clerk, studying at night to become one of South Africa's first black lawyers. In 1944, he joined the African National Congress, ANC, a movement fighting for equality. At 26, he co-founded the ANC Youth League, pushing for bolder action against apartheid. His early activism was nonviolent, boycotts, petitions, marches. But the government's response was brutal. The 1948 election brought the National Party to power, cementing apartheid as law. Blacks were banned from white areas, forced into inferior schools, stripped of voting rights. The 1950s saw mass arrests, beatings, and the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960, where 69 unarmed protesters were killed. Mandela's anger grew, but so did his resolve. His philosophy was born here. Resistance is not just rebellion. It's a demand for dignity, a refusal to accept a world that denies your humanity. Mandela wasn't fighting for himself alone. He fought for his people, for a future where justice wasn't a dream, but a reality. This spark, kindled in Kunu's hills, would become a flame that no prison could extinguish. Part 2. The Rebels' Fire and the Price of Principle. 2. The Rebels' Fire. In the 1940s, Johannesburg was a city of contrasts, glittering wealth for whites, grinding poverty for blacks. Nelson Mandela, now in his mid-20s, walked its streets with a fire in his chest. He had seen apartheid's cruelty up close. Families torn from their homes, workers beaten for demanding fair wages, entire communities relegated to slums. The African National Congress, ANC, became his home, a place where his anger found purpose. I am prepared to die for the ideal of a democratic and free society. Mandela co-founded the ANC Youth League in 1944 with Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu. They were young, bold, and tired of compromise. The ANC's older leaders preached patience, but Mandela demanded action. He organized protests, boycotts, and strikes, rallying thousands to resist past laws that restricted black movement. His charisma drew crowds. His conviction gave them hope. He wasn't just a lawyer in a suit. He was a warrior in cause. But the government fought back. The 1950 Suppression of Communism Act banned dissent, labeling activists as traitors. Mandela and his comrades were arrested, banned from public speaking, and watched by police. Yet, he didn't waver. In 1952, he led the Defiance Campaign, urging blacks to break apartheid laws nonviolently. Thousands joined, flooding jails, overwhelming the system. Mandela's name became a rallying cry. The government's response grew harsher. In 1960, the Sharpeville massacre shook the nation. 69 unarmed protesters gunned down by police. The ANC was banned, its leaders hunted. Mandela saw nonviolence failing. In 1961, he co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the ANC's armed wing, shifting to sabotage, blowing up power lines, not people. He trained in secret, traveled under aliases, earning the nickname Black Pimpernel. His philosophy evolved. Leadership is not just defiance. It's adapting to the fight, choosing the path that brings justice closer. Mandela's rebellion wasn't reckless. It was strategic, rooted in a vision of a free South Africa. He studied Gandhi, but also guerrilla tactics, knowing freedom demanded both heart and cunning. The fire that began in Kunu now burned for a nation, a flame that would test his endurance in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 3. The price of principle. In 1962, Nelson Mandela's rebellion came at a cost. At 44, he was arrested in Howick, disguised as a driver, betrayed by an informant. The charge, inciting strikes and leaving the country illegally. He stood in court, unbowed, defending his cause. "I am the first accused," he declared, turning the trial into a platform against apartheid. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. But worse was coming. In 1963, police raided an ANC hideout in Rivonia, seizing plans for guerrilla warfare. Mandela, already imprisoned, was charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government, crimes carrying the death penalty. The Rivonia trial became a global stage. Mandela's 4-hour speech from the dock was a masterpiece of defiance and clarity. He spoke of equality, of a South Africa where all could live free. "I am prepared to die," he said, not as a plea, but as a challenge to his oppressors. The world listened. Protests erupted globally: London, New York, Nairobi. The United Nations called for sanctions. But South Africa's government was unmoved. In June 1964, Mandela and 7 comrades were sentenced to life imprisonment. At 46, he was sent to Robben Island, a desolate prison off Cape Town's coast. His cell, 7 feet by 8, a thin mat, a bucket for a toilet. Mandela's freedom was gone, but his spirit wasn't. He refused to let prison break him. He read, studied law, wrote letters to his wife, Winnie, and their children. He debated with fellow inmates, turning the prison into a university of resistance. His philosophy deepened. Endurance is not just surviving. It's holding fast to your purpose, even when hope seems lost. The world outside was changing. The ANC's cause grew, fueled by Mandela's sacrifice. Songs were sung in his name. Boycotts tightened around South Africa. But inside his cell, Mandela faced isolation, hard labor, and the pain of missing his family grow. His mother died in 1968, his son in 1969. He couldn't attend their funerals. Yet, he wrote to Winnie, "My conscience is clear. I am in this struggle for my people." Mandela's principles cost him everything: freedom, family, years of his life. But they also made him a symbol. His resolve turned a man into a movement, proving that leadership is not about power. It's about sacrifice, about standing for what's right when the world demands you kneel. Part 3. Robben Island. The Crucible and the Unbroken Spirit. 4. Robben Island. The Crucible. Robben Island was a fortress of despair. A rocky outcrop off Cape Town's coast, it was South Africa's harshest prison, designed to break spirits. In 1964, Nelson Mandela, at 46, stepped onto its shores, sentenced to life for sabotage and conspiracy. His cell was a concrete box, 7 feet by 8, with a straw mat, a blanket, and a bucket for a toilet. The sun burned by day. The nights froze. This was where hope was meant to die. Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies. Mandela refused to break. The prison was brutal. Hard labor in a lime quarry, breaking rocks under a scorching sun. Warders taunted him, calling him Kafir, a slur meant to degrade. He was allowed 1 letter every 6 months, 1 visitor a year, if lucky. Letters were censored, visits monitored. His wife, Winnie, faced her own battles, harassment, arrests, bans, while raising their daughters alone. Yet, Mandela found strength in routine. He woke at dawn, exercised in his cell, and studied. He read Shakespeare, Tolstoy, and smuggled political texts. He earned a law degree by correspondence, turning his cell into a classroom. He debated with fellow inmates: Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, Govind Beki, transforming the prison into a university of resistance. They called it Mandela University, a place where ideas of freedom grew stronger behind bars. Mandela's greatest act on Robben Island was forgiveness. He spoke to his warders, learned Afrikaans, understood their fears. Some began to respect him, even smuggle news or extra food. He didn't hate them. He saw their humanity, even as they guarded his cage. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Forgiveness, he realized, was not about absolving others. It was about freeing himself from bitterness. The island tested his body, but it forged his soul. When his mother died in 1968, followed by his son Thembi in a car accident in 1969, Mandela was barred from their funerals. The pain was searing, but he wrote to Winnie, "I remain strong because I know why I fight." His philosophy deepened. Endurance is not just surviving. It's finding purpose in suffering, turning pain into power. Robben Island didn't break Nelson Mandela. It shaped him. It taught him that forgiveness is a weapon, sharper than anger, stronger than despair. In that tiny cell, he grew larger than his chains, a man whose vision would one day free a nation. 5. The Unbroken Spirit. While Mandela labored on Robben Island, his name became a global symbol. The world outside was waking up. The ANC, led by exiles like Oliver Tambo, rallied international support. Protests erupted in London, New York, and beyond, demanding Mandela's release. Songs were written, "Free Nelson Mandela," by the Specials became an anthem in 1984. Sanctions crippled South Africa's economy, isolating the apartheid regime. It always seems impossible until it's done. Inside prison, Mandela led quietly. He negotiated better conditions, more food, fewer beatings, for all prisoners, not just himself. He smuggled messages to the ANC, guiding strategy from his cell. His spirit was a beacon for inmates, who drew strength from his calm resolve. When younger prisoners arrived, angry and defiant, Mandela counseled patience. "Save your energy," he said. "This is a long war." His leadership wasn't loud. It was in his refusal to despair. He planted a garden in the prison courtyard, coaxing tomatoes from barren soil, a metaphor for his hope. He wrote letters to his daughters, Zinzi and Zenani, urging them to study, to dream, to stay strong. When Winnie faced imprisonment, he sent words of love, knowing each letter might be his last. The government tried to bend him. In the 1980s, they offered freedom if he renounced violence. Mandela refused. "I cannot sell my birthright, nor am I prepared to sell the birthright of my people," he wrote. His defiance inspired a new generation, youth in Soweto, activists worldwide, who saw Mandela as more than a man. He was a movement, a symbol of what it meant to stand unbroken. By the late 1980s, South Africa was unraveling. Protests, strikes, and international pressure forced the government to negotiate. Mandela was moved to Victor Verster Prison in 1988, a softer confinement but still a cage. He began secret talks with officials, laying the groundwork for freedom. His philosophy shown here: leadership is not just resisting, it's building bridges, even with your enemies, to create a future worth fighting for. Mandela's spirit never wavered. He turned a prison into a platform, a cell into a classroom, despair into defiance. The world watched, and his unbreakable will became the heartbeat of a revolution, proving that true strength lies not in freedom, but in the courage to endure. Part 4. The Path to Freedom and the President's Burden. 6. The Path to Freedom. In 1988, Nelson Mandela was 70 years old, still a prisoner, but no longer on Robben Island. Moved to Victor Verster Prison, he lived in a modest house, a softer cage, but a cage nonetheless. South Africa was burning. Protests, riots, and international sanctions were choking the apartheid regime. The world demanded Mandela's release, but he wasn't waiting passively. He was plotting freedom, not just for himself, but for his nation. There is no easy walk to freedom anywhere. Mandela began secret talks with the government. President P.W. Botha, desperate to quell unrest, offered conditional release, renounce violence, abandon the ANC's fight. Mandela refused. "I am not free if my people are not free," he wrote, his words smuggled out to rally supporters. His resolve forced the government's hand. In 1989, Botha suffered a stroke, and F.W. de Klerk took over, a pragmatist who saw apartheid's end nearing. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years in prison, Mandela walked free. The world watched as he stepped into Cape Town's sunlight, fist raised, Winnie at his side. At 71, his hair was gray, his body worn, but his eyes burned with purpose. Crowds roared, "Viva Mandela!" But freedom wasn't the end. It was a new battle. South Africa teetered on civil war, with violence between ANC supporters and Inkatha, a rival Zulu faction, fueled by government agents. Mandela became the ANC's leader, negotiating with de Klerk to dismantle apartheid. The talks were grueling. Distrust ran deep. Mandela faced death threats, betrayal accusations from his own side, and the weight of a nation's hopes. Yet, he remained calm, strategic, inclusive. He met with white leaders, even former jailers, to build trust. In 1993, he and de Klerk won the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts, though peace was fragile. Mandela's philosophy shown here: leadership is not just winning. It's bridging divides, choosing dialogue over destruction, even when the cost is personal. He wasn't just freeing a people. He was freeing a nation from hatred's grip, proving that freedom demands patience as much as passion. The path to freedom was paved with compromise, but Mandela never lost sight of his goal: a South Africa where all could belong. His release wasn't the victory. It was the beginning of a harder fight, one that would test his endurance like never before. 7. The President's Burden. In April 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election. For the first time, Black South Africans voted, standing in lines that stretched for miles. At 75, Nelson Mandela cast his ballot, a moment he called the realization of a dream. The ANC won overwhelmingly, and on May 10, 1994, Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's first black president. The world cheered, but the burden was immense. A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. Mandela inherited a nation fractured by centuries of oppression. Whites feared retribution. Blacks demanded justice. The economy was shaky, unemployment rampant, townships seething with unrest. Mandela's task was not just to govern, but to heal. He wore his role with grace, but the weight was heavy. He lived modestly, donating part of his salary to charity, refusing lavish perks. His leadership was revolutionary yet pragmatic. He kept skilled white officials in government to maintain stability, despite criticism from some ANC members. He championed the Rainbow Nation, a vision of unity where all races could coexist. At Rugby's 1995 World Cup, he wore the Springbok jersey, once a symbol of white supremacy, to rally a divided crowd. South Africa's victory, with Mandela cheering, became a moment of national pride. But the presidency wasn't without pain. Mandela's marriage to Winnie crumbled under years of strain, ending in divorce in 1996. His health faltered, prison's toll lingered. He faced criticism for slow progress on poverty and AIDS. Yet, he listened, reflected, and pushed forward. His philosophy was clear: leadership is not about perfection. It's about balancing justice with unity, progress with patience. Mandela served one term, stepping down in 1999 at 80. He could have clung to power, but he chose to let go, setting a democratic example. His presidency wasn't the end of South Africa's struggles, but it was a foundation. He showed that leadership is a burden carried for others, a sacrifice made for a future you may not see. Part 5. The Power of Reconciliation, the Global Icon, and the Eternal Flame. 8. The Power of Reconciliation. Nelson Mandela's presidency was not just about governing. It was about healing a nation scarred by centuries of hate. Apartheid's wounds ran deep, black communities ravaged by poverty, white South Africans fearful of revenge. Mandela knew that justice alone wasn't enough. Without reconciliation, South Africa would tear itself apart. His greatest act as president was to choose forgiveness over vengeance. No one is born hating another person. People must learn to hate. In 1995, Mandela launched the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The TRC wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. Victims of apartheid's atrocities, torture, murders, disappearances share their stories. Perpetrators, from police to politicians, could confess for amnesty. The hearings were raw, painful, televised to the nation. Families wept, killers faced their shame, and South Africa confronted its past. Mandela didn't just endorse the TRC. He lived its spirit. He invited former enemies to tea, visited apartheid leaders like P.W. Botha, and dined with prosecutors from his trials. His warmth disarmed them. At the 1995 Rugby World Cup, he wore the Springbok jersey, a symbol once tied to white oppression, and cheered alongside a mostly white crowd. When South Africa won, Mandela handed the trophy to Captain Francois Pienaar, uniting a stadium and a nation in joy. Reconciliation wasn't easy. Some blacks called it a betrayal, demanding harsher justice. Whites resisted change, clinging to privilege. But Mandela persisted, speaking to both sides, urging patience. His philosophy was clear: forgiveness is not weakness. It's a bridge to peace, a choice to build rather than burn. The TRC didn't erase pain, but it gave South Africa a chance to heal. Mandela's vision of a rainbow nation took root, imperfect but alive. He showed that reconciliation is not about forgetting. It's about facing truth with courage, choosing unity over division. 9. The Global Icon. After stepping down as president in 1999, Nelson Mandela could have rested. At 80, he had given enough, 27 years in prison, a nation reborn. But Mandela's fight wasn't over. He became a global advocate, using his voice to tackle issues others shied away from. His humility and humor, calling himself just a country boy, made him a figure the world adored. Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Mandela championed education, founding the Nelson Mandela Foundation to build schools and scholarships. He fought poverty, urging wealthy nations to act. In 2002, he tackled the AIDS crisis, a taboo in South Africa, after losing his son Makatho to the disease in 2005. He spoke openly, urging testing and treatment, saving countless lives. His courage broke stigmas, proving leadership endures beyond office. He mediated conflicts, from Burundi's civil war to global peace talks. World leaders sought his counsel: Bill Clinton, Kofi Annan, even Queen Elizabeth II, who called him a friend. In 2007, he co-founded the Elders, a group of global leaders working for peace and human rights. His white hair and frail frame belied a spirit that still burned for justice. Mandela's global impact was rooted in his humanity. He danced at concerts, laughed with children, and wept for the suffering. When he turned 90 in 2008, the world celebrated. Concerts in London, tributes from every corner. His philosophy resonated universally. Leadership is not about power. It's about service, using your light to guide others. Mandela's life inspired movements, from anti-racism to human rights. He showed that one man, armed with principle, could shift history. His global legacy is a call to action, to fight, to heal, to never stop believing in a better world. 10. The Eternal Flame. On December 5, 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away at 95 in his Johannesburg home, surrounded by family. The world mourned. South Africans sang his praises in the streets. Leaders from Barack Obama to Ban Ki-moon honored him. His memorial drew millions, a testament to a life that touched every corner of the globe. But Mandela's spirit didn't fade, it grew brighter. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made. Mandela's philosophy lives on. His lessons of forgiveness, leadership, endurance are etched in South Africa's constitution, in schools named after him, in the hearts of those he inspired. His home in Soweto, his cell on Robben Island, are now shrines where people reflect on his sacrifice. His words, like "it always seems impossible until it's done," fuel dreamers and fighters worldwide. He wasn't perfect. South Africa still grapples with inequality, corruption, and division. Mandela himself admitted his presidency couldn't solve everything. But he gave his nation a chance, a foundation to build on. His honesty, acknowledging flaws, stepping down after one term, set a standard for leadership rare in history. Mandela's life is a roadmap for us all. When hatred surrounds you, forgive. When despair looms, endure. When power tempts, serve. His philosophy is not abstract. It's practical, lived in every choice he made, from Kunu's Hills to the president's office. As you face your own battles, carry Mandela's lessons. Forgive those who wrong you, not for them, but for your peace. Lead with heart, even when the path is unclear. Endure, knowing that every step forward matters. Because, like Nelson Mandela, you are more than your struggles. You are a force for change. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Nelson Mandela's philosophy. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of courage, wisdom, and human triumph. And until next time, keep fighting, not just to survive, but to transform.